Sex happens in the flesh, but it is born in the unconscious. It is not the act that brings danger. It is what wheels beneath the surface, the unspoken wounds, the shadowed motives, the unanswered cries, the parts of your soul you swore you'd bury where no light could reach. Because flesh without awareness is fuel for stories you didn't mean to tell, and only your body knows how to speak. You see, sex is the bridge between flesh and spirit, and when you cross that bridge, carrying unresolved grief, hidden rage, or unmet longing, you don't just visit intimacy, you invade it, like thieves in the night. Carl Jung taught that everything repressed returns, and it returns distorted through your actions. This is why so much sensuality fractures instead of forming, fractures souls instead of merging them. Because the danger isn't in sex, it's in the unconscious you smuggle in with your skin. The danger is not in arousal, it's in the impulse you didn't name. The danger is not in desire, it's in the reason you're craving it. The danger isn't in connection, it's in what you're running from with connection. A man who cannot name his loneliness uses touch to silence the scream. A woman whose soul never learned to rejoice uses intimacy to distract the ache. A spirit afraid of abandonment forces closeness only to preserve distance. In the dark, your unconscious speaks. Every touch becomes a chapter in a story you never chose. Every whisper, every embrace, a confession of need, fear, memory. So what sounds like passion is often projection. What looks like chemistry is often codependence. What masquerades as romance is often a reenactment of neglect played out under cover of desire. And make no mistake, this is dangerous. Not because sex is sin, not because desire is evil, but because when sex becomes the language of a wounded soul, intimacy stops being invitation and becomes territory to conquer, territory to escape from, territory to control. So you step into the night thinking you're building connection, but you're really just clearing space for your shadow. The risk isn't in the body, it's in the spirit you left outside. Because the spirit judges not the act, it judges the why. And when you enter intimacy with stories untold, you don't just risk emotional fallout, you risk spiritual erosion. You risk giving away fragments of your soul you spent a lifetime protecting, and those fragments rarely return whole. This is what most spiritual voices ignore. Intimacy is not a salvation, it is an excavation. And when you ignore your buried ache, you bring it to the bedroom. You hide it behind sophistication, behind fantasy, behind postures of holiness. But it still creeps in your cravings, your judgments, your inability to stay present or to let someone stay present with you without discomfort. So the call is not to shut down sex. The call is to wake up to what you bring, to say, I will not enter this liturgy unexamined. I will not breathe here unprepared. I will not risk substance on borrowed desire. Your body is not safe space until your spirit is safe space. Your flesh will only reflect your wounds until your psyche sees its own face. This is why the truly awakened don't think about sex as a strategy or a score or a sin. They understand it as a spiritual barometer. It tells them where the soul is sleeping, and they use it as sacred signposts, not directionless escape. They don't chase validation in the dark. They don't need permission in the quiet. They don't touch the body without touching their own darkness first. They don't just ask, is this consensual? They ask, is my soul consensual here? Because spirit has to agree before body can belong. This is the revolution we've never learned. Not consent meetings, not performance tips, not purity pledges. We need souls awake enough to welcome desire without letting it control us. We need hearts that can hold sacred space while the flesh moves. We need spirits brave enough to name the impulse before it becomes impulse. We need quiet before chaos, awareness before arousal, courage before connection, because sex isn't the enemy, the unconscious is. And until you bring your unconscious into the light, your darkest acts will continue to betray you. This is why wild souls learn not to chase, but to consecrate. They learn not to seduce the body until they have first invited the spirit. They honor the impulse, but inspect the pattern. They treat intimacy like worship, not warfare. And when they step into union, they do not just bring their bodies, they bring their psyche. Every gasp, every sigh, every embrace becomes a prayer. Not because sex is sacred by default, but because they have made it sacred. So do not fear sex. Fear entering it with unexamined wounds. Fear giving away what you are still fighting to hold. Fear leaving the spirit behind in pursuit of flesh. Because sex isn't the reckoning, it is the reveal. And the most dangerous intimacy isn't the physical reach, it's the spiritual retreat. When desire pushes you into connection, let it pull you into clarity. When longing calls, let it awaken remembrance, not anesthesia. When passion rises, let it invite presence, let it expose shadow, let it demand reckoning. That's the path to freedom, a freedom that doesn't shrink your body or stifle your soul, but unites them in purpose, in power, in peace. For the dangerous is not the body, it is the unfelt. And the holy revolution begins the moment you refuse to touch without being touched by your own truth. So you begin to question not the act, but the impulse, not the feeling, but the origin. You stop asking, what do I want? And start asking, what is my wanting trying to say? Because beneath every desire, there is a wound that formed it, or a truth that shaped it, or a memory trying to return to the surface. And if you are not careful, if you rush to fulfill the surface need without meeting the soul beneath it, you will spend your life touching bodies while starving your spirit. This is the violence of unconscious sex. Not that it is loud, but that it is silent about what it truly seeks. A man enters a woman, and both exit emptier than when they began, not because of the act itself, but because the soul was never invited. Only the fantasy, only the need, only the unconscious pattern, repeating itself one more time, in a different bed, with the same wound. And it's all disguised as freedom, as agency, as grown. But agency without awareness is just permission to keep bleeding where no one can see. So you choose differently. You pause before you reach. You breathe before you crave. You ask your soul, will this deepen me, or will this distract me? And if the answer is fog, you wait. Because the awakened do not chase hunger. They commune with it. They do not indulge every flame. They study its source. They ask, is this fire meant to build something sacred or to burn something down? Because sex is never just sex. It is longing, history, energy, meaning, fear, hope, trauma, truth, all condensed into one moment of yes or no. And when you become a guardian of your unconscious, you become a steward of your sacred. You no longer need the experience to prove something. You need it to align something, not just with another person, but with yourself. You want to leave every encounter more whole, not more hollow. You want your body to say what your soul can stand behind. You want to become someone who could lay down beside another being in complete nakedness, physical, emotional, spiritual, and know that nothing there is pretending, nothing is performing, nothing is hiding. Only truth, only clarity, only presence. That is the real power. That is the real danger, not the act, but what lives within it. And until you understand that, you will confuse chaos for connection, chemistry for compatibility, and climax for completion. But not anymore. Now you choose presence. Now you choose awareness. Now you let your soul speak louder than your skin. Because the danger of sex was never the act. It was always everything you never said before the lights went out. And once you've tasted this kind of awareness, once you've laid in the stillness after restraint and heard your soul exhale, you can no longer go back. You can no longer let anyone enter you without also being willing to meet you, to hold your paradox, to witness your history, to remain present in your unraveling. And if they can't, you don't offer access, not as punishment, but as protection, because you've worked too hard to rebuild what unconsciousness shattered. You've stared too long into the ache behind your craving, to let someone confuse you with an outlet for their projection. You are no longer a mirror for their shame. You are no longer a refuge for their disowned shadow. You are no longer the place where people come to forget who they are. You are the place where people remember. And if they're not ready to remember, they cannot come close. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Because the clearer you become, the more discerning you must be. Not just of others, but of yourself. Every desire, every urge, every instinct is now a sacred message, not a command, a conversation. You ask, is this mine? Is this a pattern? Is this a need or a habit dressed as need? And in that stillness, you begin to reclaim the territory that impulse once ruled. Your breath becomes holy. Your pacing becomes prayer. Your presence becomes a filter for who gets to come near and for what version of yourself you allow to lead. This is the evolution. This is the revolt, not against sex, but against the unconscious, because unconsciousness is the greatest threat to sacred connection. It turns longing into transaction. It turns presence into performance. It turns divine potential into yet another rerun of trauma, masquerading as love. So when you choose consciousness, you are not just choosing restraint, you are choosing reverence. You are choosing to build altars instead of addictions, to meet people with your soul instead of your wounds, to hold your fire until it becomes light, not smoke, because now you are not driven by lack. You are led by vision, and the body follows whatever the soul worships. So you worship truth, you worship clarity, you worship wholeness, and anything that threatens to steal those from you, no matter how beautiful, how intoxicating, how familiar, is no longer worth your yes. You don't just value your peace now, you protect it, because you've seen what happens when you give your body in the absence of self. You've lived through the hollow afterglow, the ache that no touch could ease, the silence that felt louder than any moan. And you said, never again. Never again will I call disconnection freedom. Come, never again will I give myself as a placeholder in someone else's story of forgetting. Never again will I sacrifice my presence to be wanted by someone not even present with themselves. You learned that intimacy without integrity is not intimacy, it's self-erosion. That you cannot merge with another until you've merged with every forgotten part of yourself. And so you did the work. You sat in the stillness. You stared into your own hunger without turning away. You asked questions no one else dared ask. What is this craving masking? Whose voice is in this longing? What does my body remember that my mind has not yet named? And in that brutal honesty, you found a different kind of fire. Not the fire that consumes, but the fire that clarifies. The kind of flame that doesn't demand a body, il demande un soul. A soul that can meet you, match you, mirror you, not just in the bed, but in the becoming. Because you are not here to rehearse pain in the dark and call it chemistry. You are not here to call trauma bonding intimacy. You are not here to fill someone's emptiness at the expense of your own clarity. You are here to create fusion, to enter union with awareness so sharp it slices through performance, to love with a presence so real it makes counterfeit shrink in shame. And yes, that means fewer lovers, fewer invitations, fewer nights of temporary high, but it also means fewer regrets, fewer soul fragments left on bed sheets, fewer mornings waking up next to someone and still feeling alone, because now you don't want more, you want meaning. Now you don't crave attention, you crave atonement. Now you don't seek validation, you walk with value. And the people who are not aligned with that, they simply pass through your space like wind through an open window, felt but never held. Because the soul that's been purified by truth no longer clings to what it used to chase. It waits, it watches, it witnesses, and when the sacred arrives, it welcomes it home. And when the sacred does arrive, you recognize it not by intensity, but by stillness. It doesn't rush in with promises. It doesn't scream to be chosen. It doesn't demand your body before it's held your truth. It lingers. It listens. It reflects your own reverence back to you. And this is how you know you are no longer drawn to chaos. You are no longer seduced by urgency. You are no longer addicted to the ache you once mistook for love, because you've healed the part of you that thought emptiness was normal. You've rebuilt the self that once believed love required disappearance. You've broken the spell that equated being desired with being safe. Now, you don't want to be consumed, you want to be met. You want the kind of connection that doesn't leave your soul behind, the kind of touch that doesn't just ignite your body, but speaks fluently with your silence, the kind of lover who isn't fascinated by your fire, but who honors the temple it burns within. And that requires standards, not walls, not games, not punishment disguised as self-worth, but clear, grounded, sovereign standards. Because when you truly know who you are, you don't withhold as manipulation. You discern as devotion. You don't run from pleasure, you elevate it. You don't shame desire, you refine it. You don't reject the flesh, you resurrect it as sacred instrument. And the more you honor this path, the more you realize it was never about denying the body. It was about remembering what the body was always meant to carry. Not just stimulation, but revelation, not just climax. But communion, not just hunger, but holiness. Because now you've become the space you used to search for. You've become the clarity you used to crave in others. You've become the sanctuary your younger self thought only existed in fiction. And that is the most dangerous thing of all. Not your body, not your voice, not your desire, but your awakened presence, your fearless devotion to truth, your refusal to enter sacred spaces as anything less than whole. This is not the end of desire. It is its redemption. And when desire is redeemed, it stops roaring and starts resonating. It doesn't demand to be fed. It waits to be recognized. It doesn't beg to be validated. It reveals itself as sacred guidance, no longer a wild impulse clawing in the dark, now a compass humming with divine precision. You feel it differently now. It rises not with frenzy, but with knowing, not from lack, but from alignment. It's no longer a need to be fulfilled. It's an energy to be channeled. You use it to create, to move, to breathe life into things that last beyond the night. And it doesn't ask for secrecy anymore. It asks for sacred space, for ritual, for reverence, because it knows what it carries. You've stopped performing pleasure for spectators You've stopped reducing intimacy to exchange. You've stopped calling it connection when it leaves you more fragmented than before. And in that shift, you become magnetic to the miraculous, not because you've become hard to get, but because you've become impossible to misalign with. You no longer fear being alone, because your solitude is not empty. It is full of presence. You no longer fear being unmet, because you no longer meet others from your wounds. You meet them from your wholeness. You don't crave their attention. You measure their capacity. You don't fall for their fire. You ask if they can hold yours, because now you only open your temple to those who speak in the language of truth, and if they cannot stand in that flame, they were never meant to walk with you. This is what it means to be sovereign in your sensuality, to live from a place of power that is no longer reactionary, to embody a presence that transforms even silence into ceremony. And in this space, you finally realize the danger was never in sex. It was in using it to bypass your becoming. But now that you've met yourself, truly met the depths of who you are, desire has nothing left to hide behind. It stands bare, holy, and whole, just like you. So now your desire is no longer your edge, it is your anchor. It doesn't pull you away from yourself. It draws you deeper into who you are. You don't chase with it. You create with it. You don't discharge it recklessly. You direct it like sacred electricity, flowing only toward what honors your essence. You see now, you are not here to flirt with destruction and call it freedom. You are not here to be swallowed whole by others who haven't even tasted their own soul. You are here to build altars where others built escape routes, to bring ceremony to what was once carelessness, to bring clarity to what culture taught you to consume in confusion. And in doing so, you raise the standard for what connection can mean. Not transaction, not projection, but transfiguration. Two beings fully seen, fully sovereign, fully surrendered to the truth, meeting in the light with nothing left to hide. No manipulation, no power games, no acting, just presence, just reverence, just a union so honest that even God doesn't have to knock. You've cleared out every room of your temple now. There are no closets of shame, no hidden corners of unmet grief, no shadows lurking, waiting to hijack your yes. Only alignment. And because of that, your desire no longer needs to shout. It whispers now. It hums like a tuning fork, only vibrating in the presence of real resonance. You don't move based on heat anymore. You move based on harmony. And it shows in how you walk into a room and don't need to be seen, in how you hold your own gaze without needing it returned, in how you offer your presence not as bait, but as blessing. You are no longer waiting for someone to call you sacred. You already know. You already are. And once you carry that knowing, once the word sacred is no longer theory, but embodiment, you move through the world with a silence that humbles noise, not because you are passive, but because you are anchored. And anchored souls don't need to prove power. They radiate it. You no longer confuse loudness for strength. You no longer fall for the intoxication of immediacy. You know that real connection unfolds in stillness, and anything that demands urgency is trying to bypass truth. Now, even your no is sacred. Even your distance is devotional. Even your withdrawal carries a quiet sermon. I am not available for distortion. I am not accessible to unconsciousness. I am not here to abandon myself in your name. Because you've walked through the fire of disconnection and discovered that your soul was never asking for company. It was asking for integrity. It was asking for alignment between the body, the breath, and the truth that lives in your chest. And when your whole being finally aligned, you stopped performing for intimacy. You started inviting it. You started speaking without masks, touching without tension, desiring without apology. You became the kind of presence that doesn't just attract love, it filters it, refines it, reveals it. So what remains isn't a crowd, isn't noise, isn't chaos dressed in beauty. What remains is clarity. And in that clarity, you realize this has never been about sex. Not really. This has been about becoming so deeply connected to your soul that no experience, no person, no pleasure could tempt you to betray it again. You are no longer led by your craving. You are led by your communion. You are no longer fed by attention. You are nourished by truth. And those who meet you now don't just meet your body, they meet the God who lives inside it. They feel the weight of your awareness, the sharpness of your presence, the holiness of your yes, and the unshakable boundary of your no. Because when your desire is conscious, your entire life becomes a sanctuary, and you are the high priest. So now you stand not as a seeker, not as a servant of longing, but as a sovereign flame who has remembered its origin. You are no longer reaching for something outside yourself to make you feel divine. You are the divinity. You are the temple. You are the altar where presence kneels and projection deeds. There is no more shame to hide behind, no more roles to perform, no more hunger you can't name. You've walked naked through your own unconscious and come back wearing the robes of truth. And that is the most sacred act of all, because sex, in its truest form, isn't just the joining of bodies. It is the revealing of souls. And your soul, she no longer hides in dark corners, waiting to be invited. She walks in light and becomes the invitation. Now, anyone who dares to come close must meet you as you are, clear, conscious, undivided. And if they can't meet you there, you let them go, not in bitterness, but in blessing, because the awakened do not chase. They attract what is aligned and release what is not. Your yes now echoes through eternity. Your no carves out sacred space for only the holy to enter. And your presence, it is no longer a question. It is a declaration. I know who I am. I know what I carry, and I will never abandon myself again. This is what freedom feels like. Not the absence of desire, but desire held in the hands of a healed soul. This is what power looks like. Not domination, but devotion. This is what God sounds like. Not in thunder, but in the soft, steady voice inside you that always knew the truth. You were never too much. You were never broken. You were never sinful for being embodied. You were always sacred. And now you walk like it